Important notice. The narration in this video is generated by artificial intelligence. The script is an original creation and not an actual recording. It dramatizes the thinking of Richard Feynman, based on his works, to clearly explore his ideas. Do you remember school? That feeling of spending hours memorizing formulas, dates, and definitions the night before a test? The pressure to regurgitate information exactly as it was in the book. The fear that any deviation from the correct answer would result in a failing grade. We all went through it. We were trained to excel at a very specific game, the game of memorization. We learned to associate academic success with the ability to store and retrieve information on demand. Whoever had the best memory was often labeled the most intelligent. This experience profoundly shaped our perception of what it means to learn and what it means to know. We carry this lesson into adulthood, often believing that having knowledge is synonymous with having a vast archive of facts in our heads. But what if this whole system, the basis of our education, is fundamentally broken? What if what school taught us to do is not to think, but only a superficial imitation of thought? What if the skill we value most, memorization, is in fact an obstacle to true understanding? This idea may seem radical, but for Richard Feynman, it was the obvious truth. He saw the education system, in large part, as a machine for producing intellectual parrots, people who could recite dogma but were incapable of applying it. The promise of this channel, the myth destroyer, is to deconstruct the fallacies we've been taught, and few are as harmful as the confusion between memorizing and understanding. Today we'll explore Feynman's fierce critique of traditional education, based on one of his most revealing experiences in Brazil. We won't just criticize the system, we'll arm it with the method Feynman used to ensure genuine and profound understanding, a tool that transforms learning from a passive task into an active adventure of discovery. By the end of this video, you'll realize that true intelligence lies not in how many answers you can memorize, but in how deeply you understand the principles behind them, empowering you to solve problems you've never seen before. To understand Feynman's aversion to rote learning, we need to return once again to its foundation, his father's lesson about knowing the name of a bird versus knowing about the bird. This distinction was the cornerstone of his intellectual universe. For Feynman, the world was not a collection of labels to be catalogued, but a set of phenomena to be observed and understood. The education he saw around him, however, seemed obsessed with names. Teachers delivered facts, students memorized them, and tests assessed the accuracy of that memorization. It was a closed, self-sufficient system that produced an illusion of knowledge. This approach created students who might appear brilliant on a multiple-choice test, but who were completely lost when confronted with a real-world problem that didn't perfectly fit the formula they had memorized. It was a system that rewarded conformity and punished genuine curiosity, as questions that deviated from the curriculum were seen as a distraction, not as the true engine of learning. This philosophy of understanding over memorization became Feynman's guiding principle, not only in his own research but especially in his role as a teacher. He saw his colleagues in the academic system frequently falling into the same trap. They focused on teaching the tricks of the trade, how to solve a specific type of problem, how to pass an exam, instead of instilling a deep understanding of the fundamental principles of physics. Feynman believed that if a student understood the basic principles at a deep level, he could derive the solutions to a myriad of problems on his own. Teaching only the solutions was like giving someone a fish. Teaching the principles was like teaching them to fish. He opposed the idea that science was a static body of knowledge to be transferred from teacher to student. For him, science was a way of thinking, a process of questioning, doubting, and discovering. The educational system, by focusing on the memorization of facts, was effectively teaching the opposite of the scientific method. The intellectual enemy here is clear: education that values knowing what over knowing why. This approach is the complete antithesis of Feynman's philosophy. While he sought simplicity and fundamental understanding, the educational system often took refuge in complexity and memorization as substitutes for true teaching. Feynman saw this method as a fraud, a form of cargo cult science, where the forms and rituals of knowledge, books, lectures, exams, were practiced without the substance of real understanding. This created a dangerous cycle. Teachers who did not truly understand what they taught passed their superficial understanding on to a new generation of students, who in turn would become teachers and perpetuate the cycle. For Feynman, this was not only inefficient, it was morally wrong. It was a betrayal of the promise of education, which should be to liberate the human mind, not to chain it to a list of disconnected facts and undigested formulas. Feynman's intellectual weapon against this system was forged and sharpened during his time as a visiting professor in Brazil in the early 1950s. The experience, which he described in detail, was a cultural and pedagogical shock that solidified his entire critique. He arrived expecting to find a vibrant community of young physicists, but what he found perplexed him. The students were incredibly hardworking, memorized everything he said, and had perfect grades. However, when he asked a question that required even a minimal application of a concept to a new situation, the room fell silent. They could recite the laws of refraction, but couldn't explain why light appeared to bend when it entered water. Feynman's frustration peaked when he realized the depth of the problem. The students hadn't learned physics, they had learned to memorize words. This experience forced him to create an explicit method for differentiating real knowledge from mere memorization, a tool to diagnose this intellectual disease and hopefully find a cure. This tool is the essence of the Feynman technique, but applied not only to self-study but also as a diagnostic method for teaching. The mechanics were brutally direct. Instead of asking questions whose answers were in the book, he began creating questions based on real-world scenarios. He asked students to apply the knowledge, not recite it. For example, instead of asking for the definition of Brewster's law, he asked why reflections in water disappear when you look at them through polarized sunglasses at a certain angle. The answer to that question is Brewster's law in action. By forcing application, he instantly exposed the difference between those who had memorized the phrase and those who had understood the phenomenon. This approach transformed the classroom from a place of passive recitation into a laboratory of active thinking. The weapon was not a complex secret, but a shift in perspective. Testing understanding through application, not memorization. It's a principle that exposes the fragility of superficial knowledge with relentless efficiency. Let's paint the scene of the conflict. A classroom at the University of Brazil. Dozens of promising students, the best of their generation, sit in orderly rows, notebooks open, pens in hand. They look at the visiting professor, the famous American physicist, with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. The air is thick with the expectation of the traditional teaching method. The professor speaks, the students take notes. They are prepared for high-speed dictation, ready to capture every word, every equation, to then memorize them for the exam. They are the products of a system that has taught them that knowledge is a commodity to be transferred. The atmosphere is not one of curiosity, but of diligence. They are not there to question or explore, but to absorb. The silence is the sound of concentration on the task of transcription. In this environment, comprehension is a secondary, perhaps even undesirable goal, as it could lead to questions that would disrupt the smooth flow of information from the blackboard to the notebook. In the midst of this learning performance, loose thinking is on full display. The teacher, before Feynman intervenes, reads a complex definition from a book. The students copy it verbatim. The book uses an example, and the students copy the example. The logic is circular and self-sufficient. The proof that a student knows physics is their ability to reproduce the words from the book. There is no connection to the physical world, to intuition, or to everyday experience. A student can recite the formula for hydrostatic pressure, but if asked why their ears pop when they dive deep into a pool, they hesitate. The information is in a mental compartment labeled physics, completely separate from the compartment labeled real life. Jargon is used not as a shorthand for an understood concept, but as the concept itself. The word polarization becomes a magic incantation, a label to be applied, instead of a description of a real physical behavior of light. It is a system that creates an illusion of competence that crumbles upon first contact with reality. Feynman's perspective amidst this scene is one of pure horror and scientific fascination. He feels like a botanist who has discovered an entire forest of plastic plants. Everything seems right on the surface, but closer inspection reveals that nothing is alive. He observes the students and sees not future scientists, but scribes. He hears the perfect answers and hears not the sound of knowledge, but the echo of memorization. His patience is that of a doctor diagnosing an illness. He identifies the fundamental flaw not in the students, who are intelligent and hardworking, but in the very system that trained them. He realizes that they were taught to have verbal knowledge, an expression he used to describe the ability to talk about a subject without understanding it. The turning point for him is when he realizes that the problem is so deep that the teachers themselves and the authors of the textbooks are victims of the same disease. The current of ignorance was being passed down from generation to generation. Feynman decides to intervene, but not angrily. He decides to apply his method, transforming the classroom into an experiment. He takes the stage at the end of the school year to give a lecture on his experiences. The tension is palpable. The audience includes not only students but also professors and university administrators. He begins by praising the students' hard work and memory, calming the atmosphere. He then describes what he discovered, that despite all the memorized knowledge, there was no understanding. He knew that simply saying this wouldn't be enough. He needed a demonstration, an attack on the system's premise. The moment of his intervention is not a single question, but a devastating demonstration. He picks up a textbook used by everyone and opens it to a random page about polarized light. He reads a sentence and begins to ask the questions a curious person would ask, questions that the sentence itself should answer, but doesn't. The climax is the relentless application of his weapon, the search for real-world application. He reads a passage about polarization and asks, "What does this mean? Where do I see it?" He points to the light reflected on the floor and asks, "Is this light polarized? How can we test it?" The room falls silent. He describes how they could use a simple piece of Polaroid film to see the effect. He continues, page after page, showing that the books were full of definitions but empty of phenomena. The impact is profound. He is exposing the emperor's nakedness in front of the entire court. His final question, the coup de grace, is directed at everyone in the room. "I've discovered something very curious. I can ask you questions, and you answer immediately. But the next time I ask the same question with slightly different words, you don't know how to answer. What's going on?" The rhetorical question hangs in the air, and the answer is obvious to everyone. They had never understood it in the first place. The result is a mixture of shock, shame, and for some, a liberating revelation. There is no answering Feynman's demonstration. His logic is irrefutable because it is not based on complex theory, but on simple reality. He did not attack the people. He attacked the method. He demonstrated that an entire education system, of which everyone was proud, was a sham. The authority of textbooks, teachers, the entire curriculum, crumbled not under the weight of a rival argument, but under the lightness of honest and fundamental questions. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of diligence, but the uncomfortable silence of self-awareness. The lesson was public and unforgettable. An educational system that does not teach its students to apply knowledge in the real world is not teaching anything of value. It is merely an elaborate exercise in memorization that produces the illusion of competence. This experience in Brazil encapsulates one of Feynman's most profound lessons about the nature of knowledge. For him, science was synonymous with doubt and uncertainty, and he distrusted any system that presented knowledge as a set of concluded facts. He believed that education should be a training in skepticism. The context of his famous quote on this topic was his frustration with systems that do not admit ignorance. "I have approximate answers and possible beliefs with varying degrees of certainty about various things, but I am not absolutely certain of anything." What Feynman is telling us here is that the goal of education is not to replace ignorance with certainty, but to replace ignorance with intelligent uncertainty. The Brazilian students were certain of their memorized answers, but lacked understanding. A true scientist, on the other hand, is aware of the limitations of their knowledge. Education, therefore, should teach us to doubt, to question, to test, and to feel comfortable with the idea that knowledge is always evolving. How can we apply this lesson to escape the trap of memorization? The tool is the Feynman technique, used as a daily habit. Whenever you learn something new, don't just understand it. Force yourself to apply it. If you're learning a new programming concept, don't just read the definition. Write a small program that uses it. If you're learning about a historical event, try explaining the motivations of the different actors to a friend who knows nothing about the subject. Force yourself to create your own analogies. Memorization is fragile, but knowledge that you actively use becomes part of you. Feynman lived by this principle, insisting that true understanding only came through recreation. He expressed this succinctly and powerfully: "What I cannot create, I do not understand." Adopt this philosophy. View learning not as an act of consuming, but as an act of creating. Dismantle ideas and rebuild them with your own words and examples. This active process is the guaranteed antidote against the poison of verbal knowledge. The myth of memorization as intelligence has an impact that goes far beyond the classroom. It creates a workforce that is good at following instructions, but bad at innovating. It creates citizens who can quote headlines, but cannot critically analyze the news. It creates a society that values the appearances of knowledge over substance. Corporate meetings are full of people using the latest buzzwords without understanding what they mean. Political discussions are dominated by slogans repeated ad nauseum. We are living in the verbal knowledge society that Feynman diagnosed in Brazil more than 70 years ago. Challenging this is an act of intellectual rebellion. When you insist on understanding the basic principles before accepting a conclusion, you are breaking the cycle. You are refusing to play the memorization game and demanding that the game be about real understanding. Feynman's weapon, the relentless demand for fundamental application and understanding, is yours to use. You don't need to be a physicist to wield it. It's the tool of the curious, the skeptic, the one who refuses to be a passive recipient. The next time your child comes home from school with homework, don't just ask, "What did you learn today?" Ask, "Where can we see this happening in the world?" The next time your boss presents a new strategy full of buzzwords, ask for an example of how it would apply to a specific task in your daily life. You are allowed to be the person who slows down the conversation to ensure everyone is on the same page, not just using the same words. Honest ignorance is infinitely more valuable than feigned knowledge. Feynman gave us permission to be skeptical, especially about what we think we know. As he once said, reflecting on knowledge, "I think it is far more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that may be wrong." Ultimately, Feynman's critique of education wasn't an attack on teachers or students. It was a passionate plea to reclaim the joy of discovery, the beauty of the aha moment, when the pieces fall into place and you truly understand something for the first time. Education based on memorization steals that joy, replacing it with the anxiety of performance. Feynman's legacy is a reminder that learning doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a game, an exploration, an adventure. It's about taking the clock apart to see how it works, not just knowing what time it is. By adopting this approach, we're not just becoming smarter in the conventional sense. We're becoming better thinkers, more creative, more curious, and ultimately, more alive. True education isn't about filling a bucket, but about lighting a fire. And the flame Feynman lit was that of relentless curiosity and the honest pursuit of truth.